You're listening to ADHD Support Talk. ADHD Support Talk is brought to you by addclasses.com. Visit www.addclasses.com for helpful online events and resources today. Well, welcome back to ADHD Support Talk Radio. I'm your co-host, Lynne Edris, and I am a productivity coach. So I help overwhelmed professionals reduce procrastination, improve time management, and get more done with less effort so that they have more time, energy, and bandwidth for the things that matter most to them. And as you guys know, by now, I'm sure, I am a woman with ADHD myself, so I get it. I've been where so many of you are, and I've come out the other side, so to speak. I often say ADHD doesn't go away. I sure haven't, learned how to cure myself, but I have gone from living in a constant state of chaos and underperformance to a life of more success and fulfillment than I once dreamed was possible for myself. And I believe every single one of you can share your own version of success as well. You can learn more about me and what I do and the programs and services I offer at www.coachingadvantages.com. Well, today I have with me Elaine Taylor-Klaus, and in a moment we're going to talk about a really important topic for all of our listeners. I can't imagine this doesn't really apply to and resonate with every single one of our listeners. We're going to talk about self-care and self-talk. So welcome, Elaine. Glad to have you with us.
I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you as well. Tell our listeners a little bit about you, what you do, where they can learn more about you, and we'll just go ahead and jump right in because I think this is a really, like I said, a really important topic.
Super. Well, I am the CEO of and co-founder of Impact Parents that started off as Impact ADHD for about a decade. And we do training, coaching, and support for parents of what I like to call complex kids. Kids with ADHD, anxiety, LD, depression, autism, our kids, because very rarely do kids have just ADHD. Yeah, usually these kids are ADHD plus whatever. So, what I realized, like you, I'm an adult with ADD. I didn't figure it out till I was about 40. I had both learning disabilities and attention issues. And as I began to understand how to manage myself, as I found coaching, all of a sudden, with a diagnosis, my life made sense. And with coaching, I began to learn how to navigate. As you just described it so perfectly, to live the life I never imagined was even possible for myself. And the secret was that it wasn't rocket science, it really, it's, I could use it, I could transfer it, I could teach it to other parents. And I've always been on a mission to change the medical model and change the way that we talk to parents about our complex kids and take a more empowerment-based approach. So that's what I do. I'm on a mission to change the way that we think about ourselves and about our kids to set us all up for more success.
That is awesome. Very well said. And what we're going to talk about is, it is such an important part of that. Right. It's such an important part of learning to live well, learning to live the life that I'm going to get a little coachy, but that you were put on this earth to live. That's the way I feel about what I want to give my clients. And anybody who's listened to me talk for more than 2 minutes has probably heard me say this, but the thing that I always tell my clients is the toughest nut to crack is what's going on between your ears.
Yeah.
And that is, we're talking about self-talk.
And the same is true for our kids.
Absolutely.
Right? It's for us because we are modeling for them. And so when we are modeling, I can't believe I did that. What an idiot. I'm such a, right? When we say those things, that's what our kids are getting.
Yep.
Right. And they're starting to say to themselves. But when we say, oh, well, that was an interesting mistake, or oops, I made a wrong turn, then they hear that too.
Yeah.
Right. But that's a rewire, because our natural default is to beat ourselves up.
Yes. And if that worked, right. You and I wouldn't have jobs. Right?
Yes,
nobody would need us.
I mean, yes, you're right. And the problem with beating ourselves up is that it worked for a long time.
Yeah.
And there are ways, I think a lot of adults with ADD got to where they are because they motivated themselves by beating themselves up.
Yes. Yep. The guilt
Right?
and the shame and all of that.
Exactly.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so it's not that it doesn't work, it's just no way to live. It just
Yeah.
doesn't
And it's not
feel good.
sustainable.
And it's not
Right.
sustainable, and it's not, and it creates stress patterns. And it's like, so often I do work some with adults with ADD, if around parenting. But when I first started and I was doing more work with adults with ADD, the first thing I would say to new parents is put the stick down. Like that,
Yeah.
that well-worn
Yep.
groove you have in your head from beating yourself over the head with a stick your whole life. Like, put the stick down. And sometimes I actually send parents outside to get a stick and put it on their desk or put it on their kitchen counter, or put it in their car, as a reminder that that stick could also be a magic wand,
I
right?
love that.
You
I
don't
love that.
have to cream yourself with it.
I love that. I love that visual as well. So you were
Yeah.
telling me a little bit before we started the recording about like where this self-talk, self-care topic came from. Kind of tell us a little bit about how
Well,
you connected those dots.
we've always said, so at Impact, we've always said, if you don't know where to focus, there are two places to start: lean into relationship and focus on self-care, right? What we learned early on is that when we start talking to parents about self-care, they tune out because they feel that it's unimportant, or it's an indulgence, or
Right.
it's not,
Something they haven't earned.
they haven't earned it, they don't deserve it, they
Hmm.
need to put their attention on their kids. There are a million messages we tell ourselves why
Yes.
self-care is not important. But when I started, so my last book is called The Essential Guide to Raising Complex Kids with ADHD, Anxiety, and More. And it's basically a coach approach to parenting complex kids, or parenting yourself. That's what my daughter-in-law, best credit I ever got was when my daughter-in-law called and said, "Ema, I love this. I'm using it to parent myself." Like, yes.
That's awesome.
Anyway, so the last section of each chapter was on self-care, because I believe in self-care. When we first started, we would do self-care tips and we realized people wouldn't read them. And like
Hmm.
when we created our Sanity School program, there was a self-care module. People weren't doing it. So we started to integrate self-care into everything so that they couldn't skip it, right? Well, as I was writing the book, I noticed that the last section of each book on self-care was all about self-talk. And I kind of had this insight of like, oh my God, self-talk is self-care. What we say to ourselves is the quickest, easiest, cheapest form of self-care. It takes no time.
Absolutely.
You don't have to schedule it. Like, there's no excuse for not practicing that kind of self-care, right?
That's huge.
It is. So put the stick down, put your oxygen mask on, trust your instincts. These are all things that we can do by, as you say so beautifully, what we're doing between our ears,
Hmm.
right? We don't need to schedule a massage or a
Because
girls'
most of
night
y'all aren't going to do
out,
it anyway.
right? You don't need to do that to practice self-care. Self-care starts with how you speak to yourself and treat yourself, and being as kind to yourself as you are to other people.
Absolutely. And that is something that I think almost every client I have ever worked with really needs to do some, I call it reprogramming, which might be a weird way to say it, but it
I
really is
call it
some
rewiring.
rewiring. Yeah.
Yeah.
It really is. I mean, these are, by the time, we reach adulthood, we've got some pretty well-worn paths when it comes to the way we think about ourselves, right? We really do. And the way we talk to ourselves and the way
Yeah.
we respond, that stuff starts to become habitual and reflexive. So every time you screw up, you go right to, oh, here I go again. Excuse my French, guys. Same shit, different day. You're never
Right.
going to get your crap
I'm such an
together.
idiot. I'm such a
Yep.
mess up.
Yep.
Right. No,
And
there's no
even,
question.
it's the stuff that, and I'm sure you can relate to this, the stuff I hear my clients say about themselves,
It's
like breaks my
horrible.
heart. It
Yeah.
breaks my heart. I had a client, I always go back to this when I think about this topic, but I had a client years ago who was, and if you're listening to this, you know who you are. He was he was a physician. He was really accomplished. He ran the
Hmm.
entire emergency medical department of a hospital system. Like, not, I mean, this guy was like you know,
really accomplished.
really accomplished
I
by
can
every
substitute a
other.
different doctor in a different state, right?
Absolutely. And every other profession and every other walk of life, right? And on one of our first calls together, he said, "Oh, I'm such a loser. You won't believe what I did." And I was
Yeah.
like, "Back up.
Up.
Back up.
Really?
What
I
did you
know.
just say? Like,
It's
do you hear
amazing,
that
isn't
when it
it?
comes out of your mouth?" And he's like, "What? You just said to me, repeat what you just said." He couldn't repeat it. I said, "You just
Because
said
he
to
doesn't even
me,
hear it.
I'm such a loser."
Yeah.
And he's like,
Yeah.
"Well, that's how I felt in the moment." And I'm like, and we all have that feeling, but he had kids and he had a huge team of people that he was managing. Would you say that to your children? Would you say that to the people that work with you? Would that motivate them? Would that
Well,
spur
and
them to improve themselves? Of course
that's
not.
no, it doesn't. As you said earlier, long term. The
Right.
problem is that in the short
In the
term,
moment.
it gives us that
Yep.
kick. And that's what we want to move away from. We want to find
Yes.
different ways to get the kick we need
Yes.
so that we're not doing it by self-abuse. My
Absolutely.
husband always says that holding yourself accountable now for information, for behavior in the past, for information you have now that you didn't have then, is a kind of self-abuse.
It is.
And it really is. And we really do that to ourselves more than we realize.
Yeah.
And we are often just so much less kind to ourselves than we would be to anyone else. We
Absolutely.
don't treat people like that, but we think somehow it's okay to treat ourselves that way. So when my kids were little, gremlins and saboteurs, the
Yeah.
whole concept,
Yeah.
that we all have these voices in our heads that are trying to be helpful, but they're really mean. So I used to externalize it. I gave my kids little finger puppets. I was just looking to see if I have one here. And I would give them to them to put in their pockets to take with them to school, so that when they would start saying these things to themselves, they could kind of make it the gremlin, and they could beat up the gremlin. They'd come home with gremlins without their arms and ripped up and all these things, because I wanted them to know that that voice in their head isn't true.
Right.
It's not the truth. It's just one of many voices. And what else is also true is you're amazing and you're brilliant and you're kind and you're capable. And
Yes.
so we have to choose which voice we want to listen to.
Yes, absolutely. It's so important. Like we could talk about this like for hours. We could literally talk about this for hours.
I'm just going to show you one of the gremlins.
And it's like a little orange monster guy. I'm trying to think of how to describe it to our listeners.
With his
It's
arms up in the air. And yeah, it's just a little spindly thing. But
absolutely. But you're
anything
giving
you can
that.
do to take it away from making
Yes.
it true and make it as ridiculous as it is.
Yes, absolutely. So I will sometimes have my clients name the voice or name the person, I never get this word right, but it's kind of shoot, it's one of those words that but it takes me a second to get it out of my mouth. Anthropomorphizing.
Anthropomorphize.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that thing.
Yeah, that word.
Giving it a personality, giving it a name,
Yeah,
giving it an identity, so that you can learn to notice it, and then you can start to argue back a little bit, right? I
exactly.
always tell my clients, just because you think something doesn't mean it's true.
I had
So learning to question that is huge.
when I was in coaching school, we did this exercise of externalizing your saboteurs. And so I did this whole exercise, and my saboteur, my lead saboteur, is a cold calculating named Prudence, who is masquerading as a warm, loving Jewish mother. She's very well dressed and is very good at saying, "Are you going to wear that?" But so I agree with you. I think the more that you can give this character in your head a personality and know what they say, the easier it is to recognize.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it really does start there. It starts with self-awareness. It starts with identifying. And that for some clients, that's hard. Like the thinking about your thinking, paying attention to your thinking, noticing those things, and, so that you can do something about it. So, and there are lots of ways that you can start to do that.
And the step before that is to set the intention to change it.
Yes.
Right. Is to decide,
absolutely.
I'm not going to treat myself like this anymore.
Yeah.
I'm going to trust myself. I'm going to respect myself. I'm going to be loving to myself. You have to start by deciding that, I think. before you can start to change it, because otherwise you end up changing it out of a should
Yes.
instead of from a place of really wanting to be loving to yourself. Self-love
Yes.
is underrated, man.
It
It
is. It
really
is.
is.
And it's
And
and
it's so
it's not
powerful.
easy. It is
No.
powerful. It's one of
Yeah.
those things that is simple, like, kind of on the surface, and as it is, it's simple, but it's definitely not easy.
No.
So
No. And I think
any go ahead.
it's part of what our kids, I always go back to kids, and now my kids are all young adults. But still struggling with what it is to have a complex neurodiverse brain and adult in this world.
Right.
That's not easy stuff.
It's not.
It's really not. And so when we can be kind to ourselves, we can give ourselves the space to learn what you teach, to learn productivity, to learn to self-regulate, right?
Absolutely.
And it starts by saying, I choose to be kind to myself. I choose to do this.
And you deserve to.
And I deserve, yes.
Yeah.
And I deserve to.
And sometimes that's a hard thing to hear and a really hard thing for our clients to internalize and accept, but you do. Regardless of what you believe, like faith-wise, I had a client one time who said, and this is totally grammatically incorrect, and I can't do her Southern accent, but she said, you know what? God don't make no junk. And I started laughing, and I started laughing because I knew exactly what she meant. And it's true. I mean, you aren't a mistake. Every single one of us on this planet is flawed by definition. That's human
perfectly
nature,
imperfect.
right? Perfectly imperfect. Exactly. And your flaws will complement someone else's flaws. And when you can learn to kind of lean into the things that you're good at and start to be a little kinder to yourself, the things that you're good at can start to take the forefront a little more than the things that you struggle with.
Exactly. Yeah. I remember talking to a client who was saying something terrible about herself. And I remember asking her, not just, is that true, but what makes you any less deserving of your compassion than everybody else you know?
Ooh, that's
like
a great question.
It was like, what makes you everybody else deserve to be treated with compassion except you? And she froze. Right. Because and I still remember this probably 10, 15 years later, because it was so impactful to me. Like, what does make us think that we don't deserve compassion?
It's amazing. Very true.
But
it is
that
amazing.
That's part of our challenge.
It is.
And
absolutely.
Our opportunity.
Absolutely. It is an opportunity. It really is an opportunity. Yeah. And when you can crack that nut, so to speak, that what's going on between your ears, it opens everything else up. But I always say, like, no amount of strategies, no amount of systems and tools and, tips, tricks, and hacks are going to help you for the long haul if you don't get what's going on between your ears working on your behalf.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
1000%.
Absolutely. So any last thoughts for our listeners, and then tell our listeners again where they can learn more about you and what you do?
I think that the thing that I'll close with is that if you are not sure, close your eyes, take a breath, and listen, tune in. Your instincts are going to tell you when you let yourself trust them, your instincts are going to tell you how to be kind to yourself and how to be good to yourself, because your natural human loving instinct is there if you listen to it. So slow down, take the breath, tune in, and then go from there.
I like that a lot. I like that an awful lot. And start to listen, right? Listen to the talk in your mind. Listen to the way you talk to yourself. Listen to the words that you use, the thoughts that you have about yourself, and start to question them. And one of the questions I always ask my clients is, who else would you talk that way to? Is there anyone else you know of that you would say that to?
Or is that true?
That absolutely.
Is that true?
What proof do you have that that is irrefutably true, right?
Yep, exactly.
Always, like, unconditionally, irrefutably true. And the answer is always, you can always look for stuff to support whatever it is that you're focused on in the moment. You know, oh, that this one time I did that, and then there was the time that I forgot the thing, and then I lost the keys, and then, you know, locked myself out of the car, and all of the cascade of ADHD mishaps.
That humanness never happens to
Right.
everybody else.
And define and only defines you, right? Absolutely.
Right. Exactly.
Right. But that isn't defining. It isn't who you are, and it isn't all of who you are.
No.
So I love this. Thank you so much, Elaine. I think this is good stuff that I think every single one of our listeners really needs to hear. And Elaine has generously offered our listeners a complimentary copy of her 10 self-care tips. Definitely something we can all benefit from. So you can get your copy at www.coachingaddvantages.com/self-care. That's www.coachingadvantages with 2 D's, coachingaddvantages.com/self-care. You can also get the link on the podcast page on our website at www.adhdsupporttalk.com. Just click the podcast link to find that episode, or on the show notes in any of the podcast platforms that we publish. All right. I hope you guys will take advantage of her offer.
Thank you. My pleasure. I love having this conversation very much.
Me too.
My kind of talk, and it's really fun to talk with you. So thanks for having me again.
Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate all of you who are listening. And as always, I thank you for your attention, and we will catch you again next time on ADHD Support Talk. Bye.